I'm here in Niagara Falls with a historian for the city of Niagara Falls, Sherman Zavitz. I do hope I enunciate your last name properly there, Sherman.
That's all right. Nice to be with you, Reginald. Thank you.
And the first question I have to ask you, when we remember Hollywood, one of the biggest people that come to my mind when it comes to Hollywood is Marilyn Monroe. Not only because mysteriously she died at such a young age, but if you look at the kind of mark that she left, it was just amazing. Now, when it comes to the city of Niagara Falls on Ontario side, Marilyn Monroe actually did a movie out of Niagara Falls. I wonder if you could talk about that and, what kind of mark she left in this area.
Well, you're absolutely right. She did come here to Niagara Falls, Ontario back in June of 1952. She was shooting a movie here called, appropriately, Niagara. It was, a bit of a mystery, and a murder was involved too. In fact, it was Marilyn's character that was murdered, along with another character in the story as well. But yes, it drew a lot of attention, not only to Niagara Falls, but to Marilyn too. It was the first film, as I understand it, where she got top billing, star billing, along with her in the movie Joseph Cotton, Jean Peters, and of course some others. The movie was very well received. It had its Canadian premiere here, in fact, just down the street from where we are now, at the Seneca Theatre in January of 1953. And went on to make quite a bit of money for 20th Century Fox, who produced it. The director was Henry Hathaway, by the way, who's something of a legendary Hollywood director as well. A lot of footage was shot here, including the City Hall. They used our post office building, or former post office building, I should say, built in 1883-84 period. They used that as the morgue. Marilyn is shown walking into the building. The building still stands, by the way, just a few blocks from City Hall here. They used the falls, of course, a great deal. Queen Victoria Park by the falls. They used the Carillon Tower, too. That's with the Rainbow Bridge then on this side. Beautiful tower with 55 bells in it, which plays concerts quite often during the year. That was a very important part of the film, actually, the Carillon Tower. They used Oaks Garden Theatre, and a few other buildings in the area as well, including the hospital, I should mention, as well. So, yes, the city was really getting the Hollywood treatment here for a few weeks in June of 1952.
So, there are any other movie stars that have been here, and any other movies that have been done in Niagara Falls?
Yes, there have. Probably the next most famous one would be Superman 2. That was 1979 with Christopher Reeve, of course, as Superman. Margaret Kidder was his co-star. They didn't shoot the entire movie here. It was just one segment, although a fairly major segment. Most of that segment was shot down at the falls, the Canadian Falls, in the Table Rock area. And for those who saw the film, you might recall that segment. A little boy climbs up on the stone wall there just beside the falls and falls over into the gorge. And Superman sees this. He quickly gets into his Superman outfit, let's say, his cape and whatnot. He zooms down into the gorge and rescues the little boy and brings him up to his parents, and all is well. Canadian Bacon is another film that was partially shot here back in 1993.
That's one with John Candy.
John Candy, the late John Candy, that's right. And some others were involved there, too. That film got a fair bit of attention, too. And, as I say, part of it was shot here.
And, what other areas in Niagara Falls, when people come here for a vacation, what other areas would you suggest that they go check out? I know there's that the cemetery, Drummond Hill Cemetery. But, any other buildings that may stick out in your mind before we get to the Daredevils that are going over the falls in the past?
Well, yes, we have a lot to offer here. There are the obvious things, of course, the falls themselves and the beautiful parklands around the falls, and a lot of various and interesting tourist attractions in the immediate vicinity of the falls. But beyond that, there are interesting things to see, too. Interesting architecture, even in our own downtown area here. They have some very interesting buildings that date back a century or more. We, of course, are famous, too, as the site of two major battles from the War of 1812, the Battle of Lundy's Lane and the Battle of Chippewa. Both were fought within what are now the boundaries of Niagara Falls, and both those battlefields are very interesting to see. The site of the Battle of Lundy's Lane, in large part at least, is now a cemetery, and has been a cemetery actually. It was established before the battle took place, so it's a really old one. with a lot of interesting stories to tell, let's say, in the memorial stones you see there.
That's one with Laura Secord.
Laura Secord, one of the most famous individuals from that war, absolutely right, is buried there along with her husband, James Secord, who was wounded at the Battle of Queenston Heights in 1812. So yes, we have lots of interesting things to see and experience. Great old churches, the historic Portage Road, which was established in 1790, is the route, the trail, if you like, around the rapids and falls of the Niagara River. Most of that is still with us. We have a spot called Stamford Green, which is considered to be the only village green in all of Canada. A nice little spot to see as well, and so on. So there's a great variety of things to experience here.
And you also do a tour yourself. What kind of areas do you focus on here when you're walking through, giving the walkthrough tours in the city of Niagara Falls on the Ontario side?
Well, yes, as official historian, I have been doing this for about 15 years now, an annual walking tour where I take an area of the city usually, and as I say, do a walking tour of that, and the response has always been quite good. We get 70, 80, 90 people or more out on these walks each year. So we take an area, like this past spring I did the area called Falls View. That's on the high bank above the falls then. We've done the downtown area here, for example. We've done the Stamford Village area. We've done Lundy's Lane, Main and Ferry area, which has a lot of historic buildings and, of course, figures in the War of 1812 as well. We've done what is called often the Silvertown or Glengate area, which was an industrial area at one time, and has a lot of interesting history too. So again, lots of stories to tell, which is what I try to feature on these walking tours. Buildings and the stories behind them, some of the people who lived in that area at one time, and what they did, what they contributed, let's say, to the city over the years. So we try to bring in a human interest level to these walking tours, which I think makes them a little more appealing, hopefully, to people.
And, getting to the Daredevils, the ones that went over the falls, the ones that walked the falls, I know there was 2 Daredevils that came to Niagara Falls this year. There was one, Nick Walenda, walked across the falls in the beginning of summer, and then there was Jay Cochran, who was the Prince of Air, also known as Prince of Air, that he did that walk between 2 buildings, 40 stories up. Talk quickly about them if you can, and at the same time, any daredevils that may have stuck out in your mind that have gone over the falls in the barrel. I know that my wife keeps mentioning one. There was a female that went over the falls with her cat and was able to survive.
Well, that's true. Nick Walenda, Jay Cochran this year sort of have carried on the old tradition of stunting, I guess you could say, here at Niagara Falls. Jay Cochran has been here before, of course, a number of times, and has walked the wire between the Skylon Tower and the Hilton Hotel. Proceeds from this go to various charities that he sponsors here within the city. Very skilled performer, no question about it, as is Nick Walenda, who walked across the Niagara Gorge right at the falls this past June 15th, and got a lot of attention from that exploit then, which was televised throughout the United States and beyond, certainly, I guess, around the world, really. So that was an interesting experience to witness. But as I say, they sort of harken back, in a sense, to the stunters of old. We've had a number of people who have walked across the Niagara Gorge on a rope, or in some cases a wire. These were people back in the 19th century then. The first was a French-born man by the name of Jean-François Gavelet, or Blondin, to use his stage name. He was here in the summer of 1859 and again in the summer of 1860, and walked across the gorge many times. He gave a lot of performances. And he just didn't walk across, though, or walk backwards or whatever. He did a lot of stunts. He was a very innovative, clever, talented showman, and did such things as going across on stilts, believe it or not. He'd walk across at night with Roman candles on his balancing pole to light the way. He carried a man across on his back, a man who weighed about as much as he did. One time he pushed out a little cook stove on a wheelbarrow, and at the middle of the rope, more or less, he put the stove down on the rope, pulled out some eggs from his pockets, and proceeded to cook an omelet, which he ate, partially anyway, and then lowered the rest of it in a little pan tied to a string to some passengers on the Maid of the Mist boat, which was directly below him. and other things like this. He was, as I say, a great showman. We even had a lady here, the only lady rope walker we had, who came here in 1876. And she did many of the things that Blondin had done, although she didn't carry anyone across on her back. But she did walk across the rope with large baskets on her feet. The press called them peach baskets. Well, maybe they were, but they were large baskets anyway, and she got a lot of attention from that. And then, of course, people who went over the falls. That was a popular thing, too, during, or for a number of years, beginning back in 1901. When I say popular, I don't mean a lot of people did it, but a few select people, individuals did it. Annie Edson Taylor was the first to try this kind of thing. She was 63 years old at the time, was having a lot of financial problems. She was a single lady. She'd been widowed for a great many years. She had no children or any other relatives, really, that were interested in her or willing to help her with her financial plight. She had to find a way easily, quickly, to make some money, as she put it, and she hit upon this idea of going over the falls in a barrel. And at the time, she was living in Bay City, Michigan. She had a Bay City cooperage make her a 160-pound oak barrel, and she hired a manager. Frank Russell was his name, Tussie Russell they called him. And in early October of 1901, Annie and her barrel and Frank all arrived here, and she announced what she was going to do, go over the falls in this barrel. Well, few people believed it would actually happen, but Annie was a very determined lady. Once she set her mind to do something, she did it, and this was no exception. She did do a trial run. She sent the barrel over the falls with her cat in it, just to see what would happen. The barrel survived very well. The cat, there's a bit of a controversy there. Some press reports say the cat lost all of its 9 lives. Some say it survived, so I'm not sure which is right. Anyway, on October 24th, Annie herself got in the barrel about a mile above the falls. She'd hired a crew to haul her out into the river, and so she was towed out. It was all rather simple, very crude, you might even say. She had some padding inside the barrel, a bit of a harness. There was an anvil sort of screwed to the bottom of the barrel for ballast. They gave her lots of air through a bicycle pump and a valve that was on the side of the barrel. There was nothing high-tech about this. When they reached midstream, she was cut loose, and he drifted downriver. Now, this had been publicized fairly well. About 1,000 people, they say, were on hand around the Horseshoe Falls to see if this stunt would happen, and if so, what the result would be. And he came downriver, slipped over the brink, disappeared for a few minutes, then the barrel bobbed to the surface below the falls. The Maid of the Mist was out to see the barrel come up to the surface, blew its whistle, indicating the barrel, I should say, had been spotted. It was snagged with some grappling hooks and towed to the Maid of the Mist docking area. And then the lid was unscrewed by one of her handlers, and as soon as the lid was unscrewed, light, of course, went into the barrel. Annie blinked in reaction to that light, and the fellow who unscrewed the lid realized she was alive. And he couldn't believe it. He stood up and yelled, "She's alive! She's alive!" And sure enough, she was. She had to be sawed out of her barrel. She couldn't get out on her own. She was a bit cut up and banged up and in a state of shock, but she was alive. And after a few days, had pretty well come back to normal, let's say. She advised no one else to do this. She wouldn't do it again either, she said. She described the experience of going over the falls this way: "I felt as though all nature had been annihilated," which is a great line, I think. I felt as though all nature had been annihilated. Well, of course, the idea of doing this was to make money. So Annie and her barrel went on tour, but the tour did not work out. Annie had no stage presence whatsoever. Plus the fact many people at the time, at least, were not willing to spend money to see somebody they thought was, well, crazy, let's say. So the tour did not work. Later, Frank Russell, her manager, and just the barrel went on tour, and that was more successful for some reason. More people were willing to pay to see the barrel than were willing to pay to see Annie. She was reduced to selling penny postcards, really, of herself and her barrel on street corners in Niagara Falls, New York, and occasionally on this side as well. In early 1921, she was forced to do something she had fought against all her life, and that was to accept public charity. But by that time, she had no choice. She had no money, and she was almost blind and quite feeble. So she was sent to live in what they called the poorhouse in those days, over in Lockport, New York. And that's where she died later in 1921. A rather sad end, certainly, as she lamented to a newspaper reporter, "I did something no other woman had the courage to do, only to die a pauper." And to prevent her from being buried in a pauper's grave, some acquaintances of her in Niagara Falls, New York, got together and contributed some funds to buy her a proper gravesite in Oakwood Cemetery in Niagara Falls, New York, and that's where she lies. We've had some others, of course. I don't know how many more of these you want to hear about, but...
well, just the ones that really stand out in your minds, the ones that, you know, they not only they did something amazing, and, you know, they went on and they were inspiration, beacons of hope to people. I mean, that's what we need. We need to basically show people that no matter what kind of obstacles you may think you have in your life, there's people out there that have a lot worse. And, you know, if we just work within, like myself, I do stuff within my health restrictions, you know, think of the positive difference that we could make in this world. And that's what I'm trying to show with history, is that all these people in the past had done amazing things. Well, I'm not saying go out tomorrow and go in a barrel and go over the falls. I mean, that's not what I'm saying.
No,
but I'm just saying to people, I'm just saying, you know, go out and make your own splash in the world, and make a difference, and then basically inspire other people to do something really positive. So if there's anyone in your mind that's been a daredevil, that's done something and, you know, went on from doing this, but then went on and made you know, were able to make a massive difference in this world, to go out and help other, you know, like what Jay did with helping the children. Anyone from the past that's done the exact same thing that Jay's done?
Well, not that comes to my mind exactly, no, but I should point out, too, of course, stunting on the river is illegal. So, as you were correctly pointing out, we would not want people to be encouraged or to think they can just run out and go over the falls in a barrel. That should not be done. But certainly, I guess you could say many of these people had a dream of doing that kind of thing, and back in the day and age when it was permissible, and for the most part, let's say, to try this kind of thing, they did see their dream come true, sometimes, though, with fatal results. We should mention that as well. Not all these people have gone over the falls in a barrel or whatever have succeeded. 16 people have done this sort of thing over the years. 11 have survived, but 5 have not. And I think we need to keep that in mind, and remind people, too, as I say, that stunting on the falls is illegal.
Yeah. As we close this off, are there any, in your own life, you know, any inspirational people that have inspired you to do, you know, continue on showing people the history of Niagara Falls, whether it's been, you know, maybe your father, or it could be your wife, or someone else, even a teacher?
Well, I think teachers can often be somewhat inspiring. I'd like to think so anyway. I was one myself for 35 years. You never know sometimes when you plant a seed perhaps in a child's mind that may not bear fruit for some years down the road, but eventually does inspire them to do something that is of worthwhile, not only to themselves, but to the human beings in general. So I like to think that happens. I know in my own life a couple of teachers I can recall inspired me, as I realize now, later on, to perhaps even go into teaching, and just how to go about the concept or establish a philosophy of teaching. So I think often you do have...
Well, what's the one thing that, looking back right now, what is the one thing that really sticks out in your mind that these few teachers you're still thinking of years after, decades after, that they were teaching you?
Oh, I think this fact they would go the extra mile to make sure you understood a certain concept. It wasn't just presented once and that's it, you either get it or you don't sort of thing. If you didn't quite understand something, they, as I say, would take the time to explain it, maybe in class or maybe even after class they would help you out in some way. And yeah, I appreciate that sort of thing. I think that's good.
Well, I want to say in closing that everyone out there, go out and make a difference in someone else's life. You know, as Sherman and I are both saying, you know, it's illegal to do daredevil stuff over the falls right now. I'm not saying do that. I'm saying just go out and be an inspiration to someone else. And that's the most important thing to do. And what I'm going to be doing, I'm also going to be putting Sherman's email address up on this video. So that way, if people out there, they want to come to Niagara Falls and they want to get a tour off the beaten pathway, and they want to hear the real history of Niagara Falls on the Ontario side, you can contact Sherman, and I'm sure he'll email you back and he'll tell you when the next tours are in place. I really had a great time talking to Sherman. Thank you so much for your time, Sherman.
You're very welcome.